Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. I'm sorry I haven't been posting recently. I had to spend a little time in the hospital once more and then I had to mend up at the house. So I hope the rest of the year is going to be a better one. But let's get to the story. That's more important. In our last episode, Mal wasn't having many happy times in the United States and his family life was crumbling. In the meantime, John Lennon was going through his own dark times when Yoko gave him the boot. So let's see what's going on today. After John had his fight, he and May checked into the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. John continued to drink there. Harry Nielsen, who was also known to be a hard partier, remembered a madcap evening at the hotel when he spotted Mal attempting to console John, who was drinking heavily, according to Harry, crying on Mal Evans' shoulder, saying, "I was always a good boy. I was always a good boy," and Mal said, "Right, brother, you were always a good boy." "What is this horseshit? Stop being a baby. You're being a baby." "Well, if you don't like it, you can get the F out," John yelled. "Well, all right," and I slammed the door and I was crying. Feeling rejected by John, one of his idols, Nielsen became so angry that he took a bottle of whiskey and threw it through what he thought was his little window, but it turned out to be a 17-foot-high window in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. For Nielsen, it was just another incident of overlapping madness that typified his life with John and May during this era. But Jesus, it was a good time. Mal was in Fran's world now and began to imagine a new life for himself beyond the long shadow of the Beatles. He and Fran had even discussed the possibility of applying for his green card and earning permanent U.S. residency. With the success of the Ringo LP, Mal started to think of being a professional songwriter, and he owed much of his newfound confidence to Fran, whose daredevil, forward-thinking nature had buoyed his spirits. Fran said when she met the roadie, she had been struck by his larger-than-life presence, but inside he was just a child, she recalled. He had no self-esteem. It didn't take a therapist to realize that when the Beatles split up, he lost his identity. Fran was determined to build Mal back up to help him realize his dream of making a name for himself outside the Beatles. She was in love with Mal, and when she met him, she didn't know he was still married to Lil. She thought that, like so many jet-setters, he was caught up in a trial separation on the road to divorce. But the fallout after their dinner party with Cynthia and Julian changed all that. "I didn't know that Mal hadn't told his family about us," said Fran. "I mean, that's terrible." After Lily confronted Mal during a telephone call about having an L.A. girlfriend, he retreated into his already broken self-esteem. Everything had been fine until then, Fran recalled. He was so disappointed with himself for having let his family down. In her typical no-nonsense fashion, Fran cut to the chase. If he was going to wallow in misery about what he wrought back in Sunbury, there was an easy solution. Then he'd just go back, she told him. But Mal didn't want to do that. It came down to various reasons, including his unerring loyalty to the boys and his own plans for embarking on a new career. Mal was, as usual, living his life two ways. He wanted to be with Fran, to enjoy their Southern California lifestyle together, yet at the same time he longed for his family back in England. If he were being truly honest with himself, and he rarely was, he would have had to admit that his recent yearning for the life back on Stan's Road East had been rekindled only after Cynthia and Julian spilled the beans on him. That his current psychological malaise was rooted in his guilt over being found out, as much as anything else. It was a difficult pill to swallow, the idea that he wasn't affable now in everyone's eyes, that Lil and his children had good reason to be upset and disillusioned by his selfish behavior. As Fran had recognized, he was an overgrown child, lost inside that gigantic body. On Valentine's Day, Mal and Fran attended Bob Dylan and the band's concert at the L.A. Forum, the latest stop on the American Folk Heroes 1974 tour. The couple took in the show from one of the exclusive Forum Club boxes, where they sat with Ringo and Chris O'Dell. At one point, Mal's carefully honed roadie sense kicked in, and he began to notice a man crawling along the floor of the arena toward Ringo. "Watch this," Mal announced to his girlfriend. A shocked Fran observed as he attempted to stop the insurgent fan by pressing his foot upon the man's outstretched leg. Despite Mal's considerable weight coming down on him, the fan succeeded in crawling alongside Ringo and began chatting away to the Beatle, oblivious to the pain in his leg. This must be a real Beatle fan, Mal recalled thinking, because he didn't even flinch. If Mal wasn't going back to his wife and family, Fran thought he'd better resolve to make the most of his life in the here and now. John and Harry at this time had began working on a new project. The Back to Mono production had gone on hiatus after Spector's reckless behavior finally caught up with him in the form of a harrowing car accident. Barely escaping with his life after being catapulted through the windshield of his Rolls Royce, he had required some 700 stitches. As for Harry Nilsson, his latest record, A Little Touch of Smilson and the Night, had hit the charts with a thud, and he was eager to recapture the glory days of his Without You era. John, who was his drinking companion and friend, offered to serve as producer on the singer's next album. Thanks to Spector's penchant for driving while intoxicated, John had plenty of free time on his hands. They decided to call the album Strange Pussies, and John wanted to pull out all the stops for his friend, and this meant procuring the services of Mal to stage manage the production. This wasn't going to be an easy task due to John and Harry's wild ways. John thought the best way to proceed was to ensure the album's motley crew of participants live under the same roof for the duration of the project. Their salvation arrived in the form of an opulent seaside estate in Santa Monica. As it happened, they had passed that way before. Mal had recently driven John and May along the Gold Coast, where the roadie had been pulled over for speeding. Although May was terrified about what might transpire in the presence of the California Highway Patrolman, Mal played it cool, gesturing toward the famous musician in the passenger seat and gently telling the officer that they were in a hurry to keep an important appointment. Within a matter of minutes, they were once again on their way, with the patrolman mesmerized after having observed an honest-to-goodness beetle in the wild, letting them off with a warning. On the advice of Ringo's personal lawyer, Bruce Rackle, John and May toured the Spanish-style mansion on the Palisades Beach Road. Constructed in 1926, the home had been the brainchild of legendary Hollywood mogul Louis B. Mayer. The estate had earned a notorious reputation in later years, after it was purchased by actor Peter Lawford and his wife Patricia Kennedy. As John already knew, in the early 1960s, 626 Palisades Beach Road was the site of President John F. Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe's love nest. When it came time to move into the rented house, John and May took the master bedroom for themselves, with linen quipping, so this is where they did it, referring to the Kennedy and Monroe's seaside appointments. The other bedrooms at the estate were allotted to Harry, Keith Moon, and Klaus Foreman, with the estate's library, complete with President Kennedy's portrait on the wall, converted into a bedroom for Ringo, who was in town to escape his failing marriage to Mo. Recording Strange Pussies, RCA Records had blocked off studio time for John and Harry at the record plant, and that was fine with Mal because it was a short distance from Fran's duplex. The project seemed doomed from the start. It started with John and Harry earning international headlines after being kicked out of the Troubadour for disorderly behavior after heckling the Smothers Brothers earlier the same month. For Mal, working on Harry's album was nothing short of a disaster. For one thing, most of the players were in a state of drunkenness, worsened only by lines of cocaine being doled out. It didn't help that the other principal musicians, saxophonist Bobby Keys and guitarist Jesse Ed Davis and Danny Korchmar, were world-beating partiers in their own right. Along with May, a lifetime teetotaler, Mal struggled to keep the troops in order and working toward the common goal of writing Harry Nilsson's career. When the sessions devolved into chaos, which they inevitably did, Mal would throw up his hands in defeat and join in the madness. By April, Mal wasn't sure that John could even bring the album in for a landing. For one thing, Harry, as Nilsson confided in the roadie, had ruptured one of his vocal cords during an early session. Desperate to see the album through at any cost and regain his previously stellar career, Nilsson had concealed this fact from John, even as the quality of his vocal output eroded with each day. For another, the Strange Pussies production had begun to take on the pretensions of a rock and roll joke. There was no way, for example, that RCA would approve of Strange Pussies on the album title. But Harry and John plowed away anyway. For Mal, the album's high point was achieved on March 28th. In many ways, that evening alone should have given Strange Pussies the kick in the butt that it sorely needed. But the players simply weren't up to it. That night, none other than Paul and Linda had strolled into the record plant. Ever the sentimentalist, Mal was overcome by the emotion at the sight of John and Paul together for the first time since Patty's March 1970 birthday celebration at Friar Park. Unfortunately, the music they made that night was a different matter. Mal couldn't have asked for a more talented assemblage of musicians under a single roof. The great Lennon and McCartney were on hand, of course, along with Nielsen, Davis, and Keys. Better yet, they were joined that evening by Stevie Wonder, who chipped in on keyboards. There wasn't a drummer around, so Paul got behind the drums, which was Ringo's empty drum kit, joining John and a series of ragged lead vocals on such songs as Lucille and Stand By Me. For their part, Mal and May made half-hearted efforts at percussion. After several sloppy attempts at finding a groove, the musicians called it quits. What might have been an unexpected Lennon-McCartney triumph had ended in an amateurish, non-enthusiastic jam. For Mal, the sunny afternoon of March 29th would bring pure magic into contrast with the previous evening's lackluster proceedings. The McCartney clan showed up out of the blue, this time with daughters Heather, Mary, and Stella in tow. And Mal was thrilled with the prospect of seeing John and Paul together twice in the span of 2 days, no less. And he was by no means disappointed, observing the two old friends reclining on the patio together and later walking along the beach with May, Linda, and the McCartney brood trailing along behind them. Nice to see him and John together, Mal scribbled in his diary later that month. So I'm going to end the video here. Mal wasn't happy to be discovered in his fling with Fran. And word got back to his wife, and Mal could no longer be seen as a man of honor. He had disappointed his family, and Fran, his live-in lady, said maybe he should go back to his family if he was so unhappy. But Mal didn't want to, though, not only because of Fran, but because he was trying to make a life as a songwriter in L.A. Then we got to see just how bad a team John Lennon and Harry Nilsson made. And I'm sure May had her hands full most of the time. I want to wish everyone a good day and tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.